Sarah and I weren't the kind of couple that started with a spark. It was more like a steady flame that burned brighter over time. I first noticed her in our sophomore year philosophy class, though it was hard not to notice her. She had this presence, this effortless confidence that drew people in. She'd come in every day, usually running a bit late, with a small notebook in hand and a ready smile for whoever crossed her path. She didn't sit near the front or back, but somewhere in the middle, like she was both engaged and laid back at the same time. I'd see her around campus too, chatting with friends, huddling over textbooks in the library, or laughing with someone at the student center. She was always surrounded by people, but she didn't have that aloofness that some popular people do. Sarah was warm, open, and approachable. So, when we ended up in a group project together, I was secretly thrilled. Over the course of the project, I found out she was majoring in environmental science, deeply passionate about the world and how to make it better. It was rare to meet someone so focused, so driven by purpose, and I admired that about her. Our group met several times to work on the project, but gradually it was just the two of us hanging back, talking about life and our plans. We had an easy way of getting along, and soon we were hanging out outside of class. It wasn't long before Sarah and I started dating, almost as naturally as one day turning into the next. She brought so much joy into my life. Unexpected road trips, stargazing on random weeknights, midnight coffees, and conversations that would stretch until dawn. Every moment felt like an adventure with her. She taught me things I never thought about before, like how to identify trees by their leaves, or how to track constellations. Once, we drove 4 hours just to catch the sunrise from a hilltop she'd heard about. We'd sit there side by side, wrapped in blankets, talking about our childhoods, our families, and what we wanted for the future. Sarah made me feel like I was part of something bigger than myself, and being with her felt like coming home. But by the time junior year rolled around, things began to change. At first, it was subtle. Sarah would cancel our plans last minute, apologizing with a sweet smile and a quick kiss on the cheek. "I'm just swamped with this lab project," she'd say, or "my group has to meet tonight." It was never anything major, just little things here and there. I brushed it off, telling myself that we both had more responsibilities now. And then there was Jake. I'd heard of him before. He was her lab partner, a tall, easygoing guy with a laid-back personality and a reputation for being popular. I met him once or twice, a casual introduction at a party or in the hallway when I'd come to pick her up. He seemed nice enough, even cracking a joke or two to break the ice. He was studying the same major as Sarah, so they had classes and labs together. I tried to ignore the way her face would light up when she mentioned him, or how she'd recount their study sessions with a little too much detail. I didn't want to think much of it. Relationships are built on trust, right? And I trusted Sarah. But a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than just study sessions and lab reports. One Friday night, she invited me to a party some of her classmates were hosting. I was thrilled. It had been a while since we'd done something together, and I thought it could be the reset we needed. When we arrived, though, Sarah seemed distracted, always looking around, as if waiting for someone. I tried to engage her in conversation, but she seemed a little distant, her laugh not quite reaching her eyes. It wasn't long before I saw her chatting with Jake in the corner of the room. They were laughing, leaning close, and I felt this uncomfortable knot form in my stomach. I tried to shake it off, joining some friends in the kitchen, but every time I looked over, there they were, heads bent together like they were in their own little world. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was just the stress of school and life, but the feeling lingered, gnawing at me. In the weeks that followed, her phone became like another person in the relationship. She'd get messages at all hours, and every time it buzzed, she'd glance at it with a smile, quickly putting it away when she noticed me looking. I'd ask her about her day, hoping she'd share more about what was going on with her. but she'd just give vague answers or tell me about the latest lab results. There were nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was losing her. I started to question everything, our relationship, my own worth, and if I was just being paranoid. I confided in my best friend, Dan, who had known me since high school. Dan was always the grounded one, the friend who'd tell me when I was overthinking. But even he couldn't completely dismiss my suspicions. "Maybe she's just stressed," he said, but his eyes told me he wasn't entirely convinced either. One afternoon, I decided to surprise her after class, hoping to rekindle some of the magic we'd had before. I waited by the library, knowing she'd pass by on her way to her next class. But as I stood there, watching students file past, my heart skipped a beat when I saw her walking with Jake, laughing at something he said. I felt a mix of anger and helplessness rise in my chest, but I held back, not wanting to make a scene. I tried to keep my cool, to tell myself that I was just overthinking, but something in her eyes had changed. That warmth she once had for me was fading, replaced by a distance I couldn't close. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, my thoughts running in circles, wondering if I was losing her. Days passed after that fateful discovery, but it felt like I was existing in a daze. My mind was consumed with every detail of that moment when I caught them together, my girlfriend and my classmate, and the rage that simmered within me only intensified. I couldn't focus on anything. Classes blurred by, and every time I saw her or him, I felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and confusion twisting in my chest. At night, memories would resurface, blurring reality with anger-fueled fantasies. I would imagine all the confrontations we never had. What would I say if I saw him again, or her? In these imagined encounters, I demanded answers and vented the rage that I couldn't in real life. I'd met her almost a year before. We'd started dating during our second year of college. It was an intense, all-consuming kind of love. She had this way about her. She could be incredibly funny, sarcastic even, but also sensitive and thoughtful. She would stay up late, talking about her dreams and her fears, and I felt like I knew her soul. We'd built something together, something I thought was unbreakable. But in a single moment, that belief was shattered. Then there was him. We weren't best friends, but he was a classmate I respected. He was charismatic, and everyone seemed to like him. He was involved in everything, class events, sports, even some student government stuff. He was the type of guy who always seemed trustworthy, which made his betrayal sting even worse. The worst part, I still didn't understand why. Why him? And why would she throw away everything we'd shared? I tried talking to her once more, but she avoided me every chance she got. She'd switch directions in the hallway or leave the library when I showed up. After the initial confrontation, she seemed unwilling to face what she'd done. Her silence was both infuriating and painful. I wanted an apology, an explanation, anything that could make sense of the chaos in my head. But she'd left me to pick up the pieces alone. One afternoon, I saw him in the cafeteria. He was sitting with a group of friends, laughing and acting like nothing had happened. My blood boiled just looking at him. I hadn't planned to confront him here, but something inside me snapped. I walked over, every step heavy with purpose. When I got to their table, he looked up, a hint of surprise flickering across his face. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low and steady. His friends looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. They exchanged glances and got up, giving us space. He tried to look unaffected, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. "Look, man, I know what this is about. I don't know what to say." "You should have thought about that before. How could you? We were friends." The words burned in my throat. He took a deep breath and finally looked at me, his expression wavering between remorse and defensiveness. "It wasn't planned. It just happened." "Just happened?" I repeated, the rage spilling into my words. "Do you even hear yourself? This isn't something that just happens. You knew we were together. You knew what we meant to each other." He sighed, and for a moment, I thought I saw genuine regret. "I messed up. I know that. But, look, it's over. Whatever happened between us, it's done. It was a mistake. I know it doesn't make things right, but I'm sorry." But the apology sounded hollow. I shook my head, the ache of betrayal searing into my mind. "Sorry doesn't change anything. You didn't just hurt me, you made a joke out of what we had." A heavy silence hung between us. I could feel everyone in the cafeteria watching, the whispers starting as people noticed the confrontation. Finally, he muttered, "I didn't think you'd find out like this." That sentence, simple as it was, made me snap. It was so thoughtless, so disrespectful, that I felt my restraint breaking. Before I even realized it, my fists were clenched. The anger I'd bottled up for weeks exploded as I threw a punch, hitting him square in the jaw. He staggered back, shocked, but he quickly found his footing and retaliated. The next moments were a blur of fists and fury, neither of us willing to back down. I don't remember hearing anything beyond the pounding of blood in my ears. It felt like every punch was a release of the pain, the betrayal, and the anger that had built up. I didn't care if anyone saw or judged. This was between him and me. We were finally separated by a few classmates who had come over to break up the fight. We were both bruised, breathing hard, and staring at each other with raw hatred. Word of the fight spread through campus quickly, and soon I was called into the dean's office. I sat there, still seething, as the dean lectured me about violence and respect. Part of me knew he was right. I shouldn't have let it come to this. But part of me didn't care. How could I? I felt like my entire world had crumbled. Suspension was on the table, and I had to beg to avoid it. In the end, they allowed me to stay, but with a heavy mark on my record and a strong warning about any future conduct. The humiliation, though, was nothing compared to the heartbreak. Days turned into weeks, and while the physical bruises healed, the emotional scars lingered. One day, as I was leaving campus, I saw her waiting near the library entrance. I could have kept walking. Every part of me wanted to ignore her, but some part of me still needed closure. I took a deep breath and walked over. She looked at me, and I could tell she hadn't slept much. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. We found a quiet corner, and she finally opened up. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed to say it. I was confused, and I know that doesn't excuse anything." "Why him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What was it that made you do this to us?" She looked down, guilt clouding her expression. "I don't know. It was stupid. I felt distant from you, like things had become routine. And he was there, making me feel something different. I thought it was harmless at first, but I was wrong. I ruined everything." Her words didn't bring relief. If anything, they stung even more. I'd thought our routine was the steady bond we'd built together, something solid and dependable. Apparently, she had seen it as something else. "I loved you," I said, my voice breaking. "I gave everything to this relationship." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I know. I wish I could take it all back, but I can't. I have to live with that." There was a long silence. I realized that, for all the hurt, I still didn't hate her. I was disappointed, heartbroken, and lost. But deep down, I understood that holding on to resentment would only keep me trapped. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally, "but I want to move on." She nodded, and as I walked away, I felt a weight begin to lift. It was painful, but maybe, just maybe, it was the start of healing. Over the next few months, I put my energy into other things. My studies, my friendships, and rediscovering who I was outside of that relationship. The pain lingered, but it became a part of my story, not the whole story. I knew that one day I'd be ready to love again, but this time with a stronger sense of self. Time passed, and eventually Both she and he faded from my life. The anger and betrayal turned into lessons, shaping me in ways I hadn't anticipated. It was a journey I never expected, but one that helped me grow. And though it hurt, I knew I was on my way to becoming a better version of myself. We didn't talk for a while after the incident. I threw myself into my classes, avoiding everyone and everything that reminded me of her. The space between us grew, and though part of me wanted to reach out, to fix what had been broken, the other part of me knew it was beyond repair. The betrayal had cut too deep. My thoughts, however, still lingered on that moment, the moment I saw them together. It kept replaying in my mind, the way she looked at him, her smile, the touch of her hand on his arm. It haunted me in ways I couldn't escape. Then, a few weeks later, I saw him again. It was a coincidence, or perhaps the universe deciding to test my resolve. I was walking through campus, my head buried in my phone, when I ran straight into him. My heart immediately raced, and for a brief second, the world around me stopped. He seemed surprised to see me too, but the awkwardness in the air was undeniable. "Hey," he said, his voice tentative. "Hey," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a long pause as we both stood there, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to turn and walk away, to never look at him again. But I knew that avoiding confrontation wasn't going to fix anything, so I forced myself to take a deep breath and speak up. "I don't know what you want me to say, man," I said, my voice raw. "But I need you to know how much you hurt me, how much you hurt us." He nodded, his expression pained, but there was a hint of guilt in his eyes. "I know, and I'm sorry for everything. It was stupid, and I never meant to hurt you. What happened between me and her, it wasn't planned, and it wasn't something I was proud of, but I can't take it back." "I don't need you to take it back," I said, the anger bubbling up again. "What I need is for you to understand the damage you've done, not just to me, but to her too, to us." He seemed to flinch at that. I could see that he wasn't used to being confronted like this, but he needed to hear it. He needed to understand that actions have consequences, and they don't disappear just because you say you're sorry. "I never wanted to be the guy who betrayed his friend," he said softly. "I never thought it would get to that point, but I crossed a line, and I'll have to live with that. I can't undo what's been done." We stood there for what felt like hours, the silence thick between us. For a moment, I almost felt pity for him, but that quickly passed. He had made his choices, and no amount of regret could erase what had happened. He wasn't the victim here. "Well, I guess there's nothing more to say," I muttered, taking a step back. "You've apologized, and I've heard it, but that doesn't change anything for me." He nodded again, his shoulders slumping. "I get it, I really do." I turned away, the weight of the conversation sinking in. I had said what I needed to say, but it didn't feel like enough. It didn't feel like it would make the hurt go away, but as I walked away, I realized something. The moment I saw him again, the anger, the betrayal, it had flared up in me again. But when it was over, there was something else there, something different. It was like a final knot being untied. I wasn't ready to forgive him, and I wasn't ready to forget, but I was ready to move on. The next few days were hard. I went through the motions, not really allowing myself to process what had happened. I spent hours alone, replaying the moments from the past in my mind, wondering where everything had gone wrong. But slowly, I started to feel different. The pain wasn't as sharp, and the weight of it seemed to lighten. It wasn't gone. No, it was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it was fading. One afternoon, a week after the confrontation with him, I saw her. She was standing by the coffee cart in the student union, her back to me. I stopped for a moment, uncertain of what to do. She didn't seem to notice me, and part of me wanted to turn around and leave. But something pushed me forward, a need to finally speak my truth, to ask for something, anything, closure. I approached her slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. She turned when she heard my footsteps, and when she saw me, I could see the sadness in her eyes. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. We stood there in silence for a long moment before I finally broke it. "You don't need to apologize," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I just need you to know that I can't keep doing this. We're done." Her eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you, I thought. I thought maybe this could work out, whatever this was between us, but I was wrong. I was selfish." I nodded. "Yeah, you were." "I'm sorry," she whispered again. "I really am." "I know," I replied, my voice softening, "but it doesn't change anything." The tears that had been welling in her eyes finally spilled over, and she wiped them away with the back of her hand. "I wish I could take it all back. I wish I hadn't done what I did." "I know," I said again, the words feeling hollow this time. "But you can't, and neither can I." For a moment, there was nothing but silence between us, the weight of the situation hanging in the air. I felt something break inside of me, but it wasn't as painful as I expected it to be. Maybe because I had been preparing for it for weeks. Maybe because, deep down, I knew that this was the only way forward. I think this is the last time we'll see each other," I said quietly. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. She nodded, her face contorting with grief. "I understand." With that, I turned and walked away. There was no grand conclusion, no dramatic ending, just me walking away, the pieces of my heart scattering behind me. I didn't know if I'd ever get over this or if I'd ever truly forgive either of them. But in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. I was finally starting to let go. It took time, more time than I cared to admit. But eventually, the pain faded. And as I found myself sitting in a quiet cafe a few months later, I realized that I was okay. Maybe better than okay. The anger, the hurt, the heartbreak. It was all still there, buried somewhere deep inside. But it wasn't controlling me anymore. It wasn't consuming me, and that was the first step. I remember the day I met Lisa as if it were yesterday. I had been a single father for years, my life dedicated to raising my son, Alex, who was now an adult himself. Lisa came into my life unexpectedly, like a spark that rekindled a fire I had nearly forgotten. She was vivacious and warm, someone who could light up a room with just her smile. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had found someone with whom I could share my life and my family. When Lisa and I married, I was optimistic. Alex, being in his early 20s and out on his own, was supportive of our marriage but kept a respectful distance. He had always been somewhat reserved, carrying the weight of his own ambitions and struggles. Lisa made a real effort to include Alex, helping me to bridge the distance that had lingered between us over the years. Watching her take such an interest in him felt like a gift. I thought this could be the family dynamic I had hoped for, a bond that would bring us all closer together. Months passed, and things seemed comfortable, even ordinary. Alex and Lisa often chatted about everyday things, sharing conversations about work, their hobbies, and ambitions. Sometimes I would catch them in deep conversation, and I'd feel a twinge of jealousy, not because of any suspicions, but because they seemed to understand each other in ways I couldn't. Alex opened up to Lisa about struggles he'd kept hidden from me, and she shared her wisdom and support with him in return. I appreciated the connection they had, hoping it would eventually draw us all closer together as a family. But over time, I began to notice subtle changes in Lisa. She grew distant, not just with me, but in general. Often she'd brush off plans or pull away during conversations. The woman who had once been my closest confidant, who filled our home with warmth and laughter, now seemed distracted and disengaged. I convinced myself that she was dealing with stress, likely related to work or personal matters. But my intuition, gnawing and insistent, told me something more was amiss. Then there was Alex. He started visiting more frequently, often stopping by unannounced, sometimes when I wasn't home. His explanation seemed reasonable. He'd forgotten something, or he was just dropping in to check on Lisa. While I appreciated his thoughtfulness, I felt uneasy. It wasn't like Alex to be so involved in our home life, especially when he had kept to himself for so long. Yet, I brushed off these concerns, ashamed to think ill of my wife and son. One day, I decided to confront Lisa about her withdrawal. We were sitting in the living room, and I gently brought up how distant she had seemed lately. I watched as her face changed, surprise, then discomfort, then a flicker of guilt that she quickly masked. She insisted everything was fine, offering vague explanations about stress and feeling overwhelmed. Still, her answers didn't satisfy me, and an unease settled deeper into my heart. As the weeks went by, I noticed Lisa and Alex were both spending more time at the house when I wasn't there. My doubts grew, but I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, clinging to the hope that there was an innocent explanation. Finally, one evening, after a long day at work, I arrived home earlier than expected. The house was quiet, but as I walked down the hall, I overheard murmured voices coming from our bedroom. My heart raced, and a sinking dread washed over me. I pushed open the door, and there they were, Lisa and Alex, caught in a moment that shattered any lingering hope I had. The shock on their faces mirrored the disbelief I felt. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, as the full weight of betrayal pressed down on me. My mind raced, replaying the past months in flashes, piecing together the signs I had ignored, the small moments of suspicion I had brushed aside. Finally, words returned to me, though they came out strangled and trembling. "Why?" was all I managed to ask, my voice breaking under the weight of my hurt. Neither of them answered at first. The silence was unbearable, stretching out as they struggled to find words, explanations, excuses that could never undo the damage they had caused. Lisa looked away, guilt and shame plain on her face, while Alex stood there, eyes downcast, unable to meet my gaze. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," Lisa finally whispered, barely able to meet my eyes. "I don't know how it even started. We just connected. It was a mistake, but A mistake?" I echoed, my voice rising with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill, not this." I turned to Alex, who looked pale, his eyes filled with remorse. "And you, after everything we've been through?" He took a deep breath, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Dad. I don't know what to say. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." The weight of his words, their admissions, felt unbearable. I turned and walked out of the room, not trusting myself to stay another moment. I left the house that night, driving aimlessly for hours, trying to process the unimaginable betrayal. The pain was all-consuming, tearing through me as I thought of everything I had lost, of the family I had hoped to build. In the days that followed, I found myself in a haze of grief, alternating between anger, sorrow, and numbness. I couldn't bear to face either of them, knowing that the people I had loved most had betrayed me in a way I could never have anticipated. I distanced myself, taking time to reflect, to confront the emotions that surfaced one by one. Eventually, I found the strength to reach out for support. I leaned on friends, reconnected with family members I had drifted away from, and sought professional help to guide me through the healing process. Through this, I learned the importance of resilience, of not letting betrayal define my future, of allowing myself to feel the hurt without letting it consume me. Lisa and I parted ways soon after. She expressed regret, apologizing for the damage she had caused. But I knew that forgiveness would be a journey I had to take on my own terms, in my own time. Alex tried to reach out to me, seeking reconciliation. But the scars of betrayal were too fresh, too deep. I needed space, time to rebuild the life that had been torn apart. Over the months, I focused on rediscovering myself. I poured my energy into things I had neglected, reconnecting with old hobbies, fostering relationships that brought me joy and peace. I discovered that I was stronger than I had ever known, that even in the face of unimaginable hurt, I could find a way to heal, to rebuild. In the end, the betrayal that had nearly broken me became a turning point, a catalyst for change and self-discovery. I emerged from the darkness with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to build a life of integrity, one founded on trust, self-respect, and resilience. The past remained a painful memory, a reminder of what I had endured, but it no longer defined me. I moved forward, carrying with me the hard-earned lessons of love, loss, and healing.